Frogbeat Blog. Well, hello, and welcome to episode 45 of the Frogbeat Blog podcast.
Got Len on again. We talk about plant intelligence, we talk about climate, we talk about all the usual stuff I prattle on about. So, listen on.
The Frogbeat Blog.
Right then, did you know only 6 countries in the world give women and men equal legal rights? If you're a woman and want to be on an equal footing with men, it's best to live and work in Belgium, Denmark, France, Latvia, Luxembourg or Sweden. This is according to the World Bank, you know, that well-known lefty feminist organisation, the World Bank. Well, it's been tracking legal changes for the past decade and found that these were the only countries in the world to enshrine gender equality in laws affecting work. Dear me, 21st century, and we still don't have laws of equality at work in nearly every country in the world. Right, remember a few episodes back, I talked about the great vegan sausage roll controversy. In fact, I named the episode after it. I think I called it Vegan Sausage Roll. Well, Greggs, who make the vegan sausage rolls, has credited the fanfare of publicity around its vegan sausage rolls for a surge in sales that has sent the value of company to an all-time high. The UK's biggest bakery chain said it had made an exceptionally strong start to 2019, all because of the vegan sausage roll. And remember that twat formerly known as Piers Morgan had said, "Nobody was waiting for a vegan bloody sausage roll, you PC ravaged clowns." Well, obviously weren't they, you frigging man-child? Right, while we're on the subject of vegans, Nat West has apologised after a customer who called the bank to apply for a loan was told by a bank worker, "All vegans should be punched in the face." Well, that's not very nice, is it? Speaking to BBC Radio Bristol, the woman said the worker's outburst came after she told him she was vegan. After he made the comment, he explained it was because vegan activists had listened to what they'd done, these horrible things that vegan activists had done. They'd chalked pictures of animals and messages such as "friends not food" on the pavements near his home. He felt that vegans were forcing their beliefs on him. So imposing their beliefs on someone by putting chalk pictures of animals on a pavement, how is that imposing a view on somebody? Friends, not food. Oh, how awful for you, young man. It must have been awful, the trauma. I suppose you also want to punch the CEO of every company that puts billboard advertising something, yeah? They're telling you to buy their product. Are they not trying to enforce their views on you? Or is that different, is it? I'll leave it there. I wonder if you caught the story this week. This was the headline. World's largest bee missing for 38 years found alive in Indonesia. And now when you read that headline, you're thinking, why didn't they put his picture on the side of a milk carton or in the local shop, bee missing or something like that? But having read on, I'm not sure it means one particular bee's missing. I don't think it's a lost bee. But this is what it says. As long as an adult thumb with jaws like a stag beetle and 4 times larger than a honeybee, Wallace's giant bee is not exactly inconspicuous. But after going missing, feared extinct for 38 years, the world's largest bee has been rediscovered alive on the Indonesian islands of North Moluccas. The bee's habitat is threatened by massive deforestation for agriculture, and its size and rarity make it a target for collectors. There is, at present, no legal protection concerning the trading of Wallace's giant bee. I'm sorry, but what sort of twat collects rare bees? Do they kill them or what? Are some people insane?
The Frogbeat Blog.
I've not done one of them infinite number of universes things for a while, have I? And if you're a newest listener, you might not have heard this, but I worked out, according to the infinite number of universes theory, if it's true, which it may well be, certain physicists say it's true, what they say is everything that can happen will happen. So in Parallel Universe, there's a Beatles lyric called Raspberry Fields for the next half hour, or a Beatles ode to seaweed called Kelp. Yeah, well, Matt's emailed in and said, after your piece about dog owners giving dogs CBD oil and dogs eating cannabis by accident, I thought, in a parallel universe, there's an 80s band of Mancunian dogs called the Stone Rovers. Very good, I like that. In a parallel universe, there's a 70s film starring John Travolta called Saturday Night Influenza, or probably in another universe, one called Saturday Night Diarrhea. A bit bad taste. I made them. That wasn't Matt, that was mine. Okay, and I'm not very proud of that one. Right, this is well and truly shocking. The pétanque, the world of pétanque. Have you ever played pétanque? You know, it's French boule. Well, it's been rocked by drug scandals. Listen to this. The sleepy world of pétanque has been rocked by claims that Belgian players are turning to stronger stimulants than shots of pastis and drags of gitane boufiltre when bowling on the international stage. The image of jeu de boule, in which the bowler's feet must remain anchored to the ground, is that of elderly men in flat caps and string vests idling their days away under the fading sun. But beyond the gravel strips found on squares and summer campsites across northern continental Europe, two leading players on the game's lively and cutthroat international stage have caused uproar by accusing their Belgian counterparts of snorting cocaine to secure a competitive edge. I know enough Belgian players who use coke, said Edward Vink, 46, a top Dutch player speaking to the Vice Sports website. They go to the toilet and do not throw a wrong ball when they come back. Is that some sort of euphemism? They go to the toilet and do not throw a wrong ball when they come back. They really feel like the king. I'm sorry, but how does taking cocaine help you throw a metal ball into the air a bit better? I experienced it once, said Keys Kuji. I don't know if he's implying that he's taken the drug. We were far ahead and had played flawlessly. Then they went to the bathroom for 10 minutes and came back with huge eyes. Everything went well for them. It goes on to say the use of cannabis on pétanque tournaments also occurs in Belgium and France. When I'm playing in Belgium on a large open area, I always smell a lot of smoke. Usually it is the players who participate in such a tournament for fun, not the top players. So there you go. The people dicking about for fun smoke cannabis, but the top professionals take cocaine. Who'd have thought it, eh? Pétanque.
The Frog Beat Blog.
So, surprise, surprise, old Trumpy Pumpy has set up a new climate change committee and put a climate denier in charge of it. And it's a scientist who apparently, to his credit, has made some good discoveries, but for some reason he's got a blind spot when it comes to the climate. And he's gone around saying that carbon dioxide is good. And I've heard this of a few Republicans. I think it's the thing that they're saying now. And they say it's good because it makes plants grow, and plants grow better with carbon dioxide. Well, thank God for that. Because before we started pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere at the start of the industrial age, plants wouldn't grow properly, would they? Did you know that? Thank God for that extra CO2. I mean, apart from droughts, extreme temperatures, floods, fires, I mean, the plants are going to do really well apart from all that. So, anyway, hey-ho, they have lots of lovely CO2 in them, don't they? But forums and articles, it's amazing, are still full of climate deniers. And I was reading one article where they believed climate change, and it was described as, believing in climate change was described as leftist, this leftist climate change belief. So probably that means that people who are not on the left don't believe in climate science. It's amazing, isn't it, how it's been politicized to be leftist. I don't know. I think I always thought of myself as a progressive and not at all Maoist and Stalinist. But when I sometimes hear deliberately stupid nonsense like this, I do think, come the day of the revolution, we need some re-education camps for these people like these. Not them re-education camps where they work in salt mines and out like that, but re-education camps where we sit them down and force them to watch some science programs again and again and again until they get the effing message. Come the day of the revolution, you're not going to be up against the wall. You're going to be made to watch telly, you ignorant bloody fools. And while we're on the subject of climate change, it was announced this week that it's now 1 in a million chance that it's not man-made. 1 in a million chance that climate change isn't man-made. Don't tell Trump that. Don't tell Trump that he's 1 in a million, because you know how he'll take it. And while we're on the subject, I think I've actually changed my mind. I think I'm going to go pro-climate change because the weather has been lovely. We've had about a week of really lovely weather in the northeast in February. So, it's been really hot. And I'm just wondering, can we not just keep the nice bits of climate change? You know what I mean? Tweak it a bit so we have the nice bits. Because cycling into work, there's been cherry blossom out on the trees about 6 weeks early, cherry blossom. And I'm sniffing the fragrance as I go past, as you do, which in February is quite incredible. And on Friday, it was cold again. So as I was going past, I was like going to say, that'll bloody teach you. Anyway, it has been strange weather. And it's funny, though, how it's reported here in the countries. And the usual tabloids went with the, whew, what a scorcher headlines. But even the BBC, apparently, now I'm saying apparently because I don't watch the BBC News. Now it's been overtaken by Cameron's Tory friends. And that's not just paranoia. All the leading political analysts on the BBC now are ex-Tory party people. Anyway, the good old BBC focused on the amazing upturn in ice cream sales, right? Seriously, ice fucking cream. Yeah, the world's burning, but the narrative of the nation's broadcaster wants to talk not about global warming, but how global warming is going to sell more Ben & Jerry's. And actually, as a quick aside, we had some Ben & Jerry's vegan ice cream last week. And whether you're vegan or not, give it a go because it was the most wonderful thing I've ever eaten. Anyway, back to the end of the world. So unless we get off our arses, yes. But anyway, the kids are revolting. I called my episode last week this. And, there was all those school strikes. Well, UK Parliament finally decided to have a debate about climate change for the first time in 2 years. And I don't know if you've seen the photos, but the chamber at the House of Parliament is basically empty. Yeah. MPs aren't really asked about the future of humanity, but the kids are. And listen to this. The students striking from schools around the world to demand action on climate change have issued an uncompromising opening letter stating, "We are going to change the fate of humanity whether you like it or not." The letter published by The Guardian says, "United, we will rise on March the 15th and many times after until we see climate justice. We demand the world's decision makers take responsibility and solve the crisis. You have failed us in the past, but the youth of this world has started to move and we will not rest again." Ooh, don't mess with the kids. Right, that's enough of me waffling on for 5 minutes. I think it's that time of the week where we have Sexy Len on.
It's Len again. Oh yeah, it's Len again. Len. Oh, Len. Oh, Sexy Len.
Right, so here he is again, twice on the run. We've got him. Welcome back, Len. How are you doing?
I'm very well. It's always a pleasure.
Yes, how's the cycling going?
Not as well as I would want it to. Not as well as you.
Why is that?
It's over the Christmas holidays. Basically, I haven't got the fancy winter tyres that you have, so it's kind of like, and I was fearing for my life on my journey.
I know.
So,
I tell you, I've said this before to anyone that's listened to cycles. You've got to get one of these winter tyres. They've got loads of little rivets in, hundreds of little rivets, and you can just, we had some bad snow that then went really hard, and it just stops you falling off. And I know it works because I don't fall off, but B, I haven't got one on the back. I've just got one on the front, and I can feel the back end going. Right. So obviously, if I didn't have one on the front, I'd be on my arse, which isn't that good. So you're struggling a bit to get back on.
Well, a little bit. It's mostly because I've got a really good cheap bus route as well, which is kind of always a temptation, isn't it? So it's kind of like that, and it's for me, it's never the physicality. I mean, I've actually I feel like I've surprised myself with the physicality of actually doing the cycle, and I can do it for 2 hours a day and really enjoy it and enjoy the mindfulness of it, enjoy the exercise. It's having good effect on my body. It's bringing my energy levels up and everything like that. It's just the pure faff around it. I haven't got a garage, which is a real struggle about it. Yeah. And I think that's kind of created a few problems for me, because I've got to like start undoing a load of locks, taking the sheeting off it, attach the bags and sort it all out in the evening. So it's like I'm trying to work out the logistics, really. It sounds a bit silly, but that's what's stopping us from doing it at the moment.
Well, no, I mean, and the thing is as well, if you've got a good alternative transport like you said, the bus in, I mean, it's great that you're not having to resort to a car. I mean, I could get the bus in. I've never have done in this. I think I've done it twice in the 6 years I've lived where I have, especially since I've got my winter tyre. I've not had to not cycle, but the bus, I think it stops closer now, but it used to stop about a mile and a half away from where I work. So that added on, I can get, 10 miles in 45 minutes, which is incredible, really.
You have to do it, which is pretty much have to do it, and that's a really good motivational factor as well.
Yeah, whereas you've got the option.
I think having an electric bike might help as well. I think.
Oh God, yes. I mean, I've been ill and just been able to just get back on it and stick it on full.
Yeah,
to get on full help, which I try not to, but it's temptation somehow.
Don't blame you.
Yeah, and talking of bikes, we found this bike on the internet, and it's an exercise bike that you can actually wire up to the grid, and it was invented by this Indian guy. I'll try and find his name. Yeah, my page isn't scrolling now, but it's invented by this Indian guy that's really wanted to give it to sort of like communities that lack power. What's his name? Bhargava. I don't know what his first name is because the page isn't scrolling. But Manoj Bhargava, and he the idea was for small communities that run out of electricity in India and stuff, that they could get one of these bikes, and they have to pedal for an hour, and then it charges the electricity of a house for 24 hours, which is absolutely brilliant.
Genius.
Now, I mean, even in the West, because we consume more energy, well, some of us do. We don't tend to do a lot, but it wouldn't be great because, you want that exercise in winter that you could just, if we each had a little bike that we could just pedal away for an hour, and then that would really cut down on our electric bills and cut down on, obviously, on the electric use and energy use and that sort of thing.
Obviously, the things in the home that are actually being powered are getting much more efficient as they go as well. But obviously, I suppose we'll have to take into account like the impact of having, presumably this is battery storage.
Yes.
So they're going to have to look at the sort of the impact of having all them batteries lying around, the chemicals to produce.
Well, yes, this is the one, isn't it? Because battery storage, in a way, is the big plus for renewables, isn't it? Really, it's the one thing that means that you can have solar panels at night and you can have solar panels at winter. Was it someone on Fox News was saying, because they've had the polar vortex in America, and they were sort of laughing, going, how are your solar panels managing now? When in fact, someone pointed that solar panels are actually more effective in cold weather than they are in warm weather. Yeah, exactly. And talking of solar, I was reading this transparent solar technology is about to come out, which is like glass-looking things. And if you think the amount of glass that buildings have or could have, that it was all... I mean, basically, it doesn't look that long before most of our buildings could be totally solar.
Absolutely.
Cells, as it were.
Well, I mean, even the Tesla people, Elon Musk's guys and girls are on creating the roof tiles that are solar completely. I think we probably talked about it on the podcast actually. They look very similar to traditional roof tiles, and incredibly, they're actually cheaper to produce.
Yes,
which is phenomenal.
I know.
And again, it's just the battery storage for each home is there. Well, for me, I've always just been confused by like all of this. Like if you're going to have each house has its own battery storage, as in your house has a boiler, your neighbour has a boiler, all that kind of stuff. Like, why is this not a street based? Why is that not community based? Why not have a giant battery at the end of the street that's maintained by a
I mean, I think that's it's interesting because that's how it's going to end up. And I did read somewhere on some communities where they can actually sell individually to their neighbours any spare power.
Brilliant.
And we're going to get away from this idea of base load, which is just an old fashioned way of looking at things, that we have to have these big power stations that are providing base load, and that the future is going to be a lot more flexible. It's going to be a lot more community based, where if you've got some spare lecky, you can sell it to your
It's a safer infrastructure as well, isn't it? It's less subjective to terrorist attack and things like that.
Completely. You know, and it'll be a mixture of wind, it can be a mixture of solar, it can be all sorts. I mean, you know, the one that I was thinking that hasn't really took off, and I'm sure if they put money into it, is wave power, because you know, the waves are never going to run out, are they? And there's a talk about this one. There's a Swansea Lagoon. One that the government refused to subsidise because they said it wasn't worth it. And I've actually just read that they reckon they can go ahead with it without any government subsidy anyway. They're going to go away with it. But it is, I mean, it's going to be, I think it's going to be a lot more localised system. It's just obviously the powers that be, I don't want to sound too conspiratorial, but they, you know, all the oil companies and the energy companies will lose out here because we could be independent producers one way or another.
Indeed. And they're going to have to.
Yeah. Well, talking of wind, that's probably a good point to stop. Well, thank you once again for coming in.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, cheers.
The Frog Beat Blog.
Right, I read this interesting article the other day, and it refutes because one of the main problems with humanity, as well as climate change, is the population growth. And there's an article the other day that refutes the claim that population is going to keep growing and growing. Now, I don't know where the efficacy of this, but this is what it says. By 2050, there will be 9 billion carbon-burning, plastic-polluting, calorie-consuming people on the planet. By 2100, that number will balloon to 11 billion, pushing society into a Soylent Green scenario. Such dire population predictions aren't the stuff of sci-fi. Those numbers come from one of the most trusted world authorities, the United Nations. But what if they are wrong? Not like off by a rounding error, but like totally, completely goofed. That's the conclusion of Canadian journalist John Ibbotson and political scientist Darren Bricker come in to their newest book, Empty Planet. After painstakingly breaking down the numbers for themselves, the pairs arrived at a drastically different prediction for the future of the human species. In roughly 3 decades, the global population will begin to decline, they write. Once that decline begins, it will never end. Well, and they were asked, the UN is a well-regarded authority on everything from public health to food security and global economics. What makes you think they were getting population growth so wrong? And this is what he said. The UN population data is something we call vertical knowledge, or everybody knows knowledge. And whenever that happens, you should really go and look hard at the assumptions and test them yourself, because most of the time, reality has already moved past where the vertical knowledge resides. So that's what we did. And it didn't take long before we realised there was a whole body of demographers who had been questioning the UN's numbers for years. They'd just been talking to each other at conferences and through scholarly articles, but they'd never gotten this information before the general public. And that was our kind of starting point. And when we went out and talked to real people in the world about the choices they were making, that's when the statistics we were seeing came to life. And basically, it goes on to say that they reckon that because of urbanization and other factors such as improved education, and especially for women, women the world over having less kids, and they're going to have less and less and less kids. The external forces that used to dictate people having bigger families are disappearing everywhere, and that's happening fastest in developing countries. In the Philippines, for example, fertility rates have dropped from 3.7% to 2.7% from 2003 to 2018. That's a whole kid in 15 years. Well, just one kid in 15 years, that's not going to help much, is it? I mean, I actually didn't mean that. And it goes on to say, if you dig in and see there isn't going to be a lot of growth of young people coming into the population, a lot of growth is actually going to come from older people hanging around longer because we're getting better every day at keeping them alive. And I suppose that's the big unknown, isn't it? That apparently today, kids being born today, if they get the chance, will still be living to the age of over 100. Now, I don't know whether this is true or not. But anyway, maybe it's a glimmer of hope. So if we can transition to a carbon neutral economy and not blow ourselves up with nuclear weapons or die out because we've wiped out our ecosystem or any of those other existential threats, well, if you ignore all them, everything's gonna be fine.
Okay, to talk about drugs.
Right, I used to read the Independent newspaper years ago, and it was good. And one of the journalists in there was called Johan Hari. I don't know if you've heard of him. Well, I've come across him recently on the Joe Rogan show, and then I found him on a TED Talk. And it was called Everything You Think You Know About Addiction Is Wrong. And he's done lots of research. I think he's written a book on it. Because he had addicts in his family, and it sort of inspired him to research about it. Been all over the world talking to experts everywhere. And it's really interesting because he sort of argues, and what he's found is that drug addiction is an adaptation to the environment. And the example he gave, and the example that scientists used to use, was they put rats in a cage, just a bare cage, and give them 2 bottles. One would be with water and one would be with heroin mixed in with water, and quite quickly the rats would get addicted to heroin and just keep taking it and probably die in the end. And that was the sort of proof that drugs were addictive. But what of course it meant, there was rats, which are highly intelligent creatures, were just sat in a cage on their own, bored out their mind in a bored environment, and just thought, we may as well take heroin because there's now else to do. And then more recently, this bloke called Professor Alexander did a new rat cage experiment, and he built these rat cages called Rat Park, which were heaven for rats. And they had lots of things to do in there. They had other rats that they could have sex with or play with or whatever. And they did the same, the drink of water or the drink of heroin mixed in with water, and the rats didn't actually get addicted. So that when the environment was good, is that they didn't feel the need to take it. And Hari goes on to argue that we use drugs as a bonding substitute for human interactions. And whether it's gambling, whether it's coke, whether it's heroin, when we don't have decent human interactions, that's when we get addicted to things. And the core part of addiction is not being present in your life, and when you have problems in your life, and when you're not happy in your environment for whatever reason. I mean, there's a whole myriad of reasons. When you're not happy in your environment, that's when you're more likely to be addicted. And according to the UN, 90% of drug use is non-problematic. So people can take all manner of drugs, legal and illegal, and it's non-problematic. And this 10% of drug use is actually the serious stuff. And we've come to believe in this idea of chemical hooks, that if we all, the thing that gets us and the drug is the chemical hook, and that's only a small part of it. The idea that if we took heroin for a month, we would become addicted, and it doesn't work like that. There is a small element of it, which is the chemical hook, but it's not as important as we think. And there's lots of examples that Johan Hari gave, like, people in hospital get given really strong, pure morphine when they've had hip replacements, and everybody would come out of hospital would be addictive, and it doesn't work like that. So addiction tends to happen when people's lives are bad, and and there tends to be less addiction when life is good, because you want to get on and enjoy your life, and chemical hooks only play a small role. So when we have this war on drugs that we've had for getting on for 100 years, we criminalize people. It just makes them feel worse, and it doesn't work. And the best models we've got are places like Portugal, that's decriminalized all drugs, and Switzerland that adopted a positive attitude to heroin, where addicts can go and get free heroin for as long as they want from a government shop. It's free. They can keep taking it forever. There's no pressure, and it works. And no one has ever died from a heroin overdose as part of this program that they do. And it has massively reduced the number of addicts. And as Johan Hari says, Switzerland isn't a liberal country. They're very pragmatic, and they got scientists to look at what the best way of dealing with this. And they just wanted to do what works, which is giving out free heroin to addicts, and it works. So it does seem like we need to treat drugs as a health issue and not a criminal issue, because criminalising drug addicts just makes them more removed. And, it puts even further barriers in their way to overcoming their addiction. And the science and then practice shows that this works. So why isn't every country doing it? We're still stuck with this 100-year-old war on drugs that doesn't work. It kills people. It creates a black market that is run by gangsters, and it increases crime, burglaries and robberies as addicts get into this downward spiral where they need to, create crime to sort of pay for the addicts. And it's really, isn't it? It's time that drugs laws were changed, and it won't be painless, and we have to be grown up about this. If we decriminalise all drugs, it wouldn't be without problems, but it will be far better than what we have now. And the daft thing is, most people want some sort of decriminalisation, mainly around cannabis, but, there is an argument that you decriminalise all drugs, you change the basis of them, and science and practice is showing that this is the right way to go. So that's all I'm going to talk about on drugs this week.
Okay to talk about drugs. Is it okay? Gonna do it anyway.
It's clever, it's so fucking clever, cleverer than Trevor. Though I don't know a Trevor, that's all that runs with clever. Actually, there's weather and never, and fucking vegan leather. But nature is clever, it's really
Right, in this episode of Nature is Clever, I'm talking about plants. And in a bit, I'm going to talk about plants again in Deepest Secrets of Our Souls, but I'm mentioning now because they're really, really clever. And what I think about plants, but apparently they can hear too. Right, there's a team of scientists led someone called Haddany, and they looked at evening primrose, which are very nice. They lovely smell in the evening, and they smell of primrose. And they found that within minutes of sensing vibrations from pollinators' wings, the plants temporarily increased the concentration of sugar in the flower's nectar. In effect, the flowers themselves served as ears, picking up the specific frequency of bees' wings while tuning out irrelevant sounds like the wings, so they could like the wind, so they could actually pick out bees' wings. To test the primroses in the lab, Had and his team exposed plants to 5 sound treatments: silence, recordings of a honeybee from 4 inches away, computer-generated sounds in low, intermediate, and high frequencies. And the plants given the silent treatment, which were placed under vibration blocking glass jars, had no significant increase in nectar sugar concentration. And the same went for the plants exposed to high frequency and intermediate frequency sounds. But for plants exposed to playbacks of bee sounds and similar low frequency sounds, the final analysis that revealed an unmistakable response. Within 3 minutes of exposure to these recordings, sugar concentrations in the plants increased from between 12 and 17% to 20%, which is amazing. So plants themselves, the shape of the plant, act like ears.
Will somebody please think of the flowers? You know that they have feelings just like ours.
Yes, will somebody please think of the flowers? Because I've just finished reading the Monica Gagliano book, Thus Spoke the Plant, and I've really enjoyed it on the whole. There are parts where she uses big words. I mean, she is a professor after all, which when I'm reading it in bed is a bit hard on the brain. I can understand one big word at a time, but when she uses several in the sentence, then I struggle. But anyway, on with the tell. It's a great book. And the book is a story of her journey into becoming probably the foremost top scientist studying plant intelligence. And it's an incredible journey because she sort of ends up getting invited to these indigenous plant ceremonies by Native American Indians and Amazon Indians and all this sort of stuff. And ceremonies that often often aren't open to Westerners, but the plants guided her there. No, seriously, it's quite an edible story. And she does say that the plant spoke to her. Now, admittedly, she was usually under the influence of healing plants, in inverted commas, but don't let that take away from her story. And when she went to see some indigenous Amazonian healer in Peru and had some herbs, and one of the plants that came to her was the tobacco plant. And I didn't know this, but in plant medicine, the tobacco plant is regarded as a great healing plant. It's only when Westerners took it and started rolling them up and selling them as 20 Benson and Hedges, or 20 Bennies, as we used to say. It was only then, and they're full of chemicals and shit and become addicted day after, and you're smoking them day after day, that it became a problem. But the tobacco plant is actually a great healing plant. Anyway, back to the story, because remember I told you that Monica did the work on Mimosa pudica to show that plants can learn behaviour and memorise that behaviour for weeks. Well, she in the book, she talks about how she went on to show that plants can exhibit a Pavlovian response. And remember how Pavlov's dogs hear a bell ring and then they got fed, and after a while they would they could salivate just on hearing the bell ring. Well, she did the same sort of things with plants, with peas to be exact. She kept them in the dark, switched a fan on, then later gave the plants light that they would grow towards. Then after a while, the plants would move towards the sensation of just the fan being switched on. So they learned behaviour by association. Well, incredible. In another experiment, she ran water through a pipe under the plant, and the roots moved towards the sound of the water, which just sort of shows how many senses she has. And she does also discuss the idea of human exceptionalism, with something that I've talked about before. And not just that, but how much of our attitude to nature is down to cultural conditioning and how we value the traits that humans are good at, such as movement and communication through language. And we seem to diminish the fact that plants and trees can communicate. They just don't use language. They are alive and sentient, but we all exhibit this human exceptionalism. And every time you find yourself talking about other animals and plants, you always end up saying, yeah, but, trees can communicate. Yeah, but they can't talk. Trees are alive. Yeah, but they can't move like we can. And we tend to put ourselves on this pedestal and look down on everything else. And remember, this is a social construct. It's a cultural construct. If you go and live in a tribe of hunter-gatherers or indigenous tribespeople, they would hold a different view about how humans fit into the ecosystem. And unfortunately, it's partly this human exceptionalism that's destroying the planet, because we value everything else less than we value the human race. I know maybe it's natural, maybe it's just us tree huggers that are weirdos. It's like when I was talking about in the other sketch, how plants have hearing ability. Yeah, but they ain't got a brain, they ain't got ears, how can they hear? Again, that's human exceptionalism, isn't it? It's presuming the only way to sense things is the human way. And I talked about this before about birds, and we used to think they couldn't do clever things because they lacked the prefrontal cortex in the brain, like what we humans have, and therefore they couldn't be clever. But then we found out they could. They could find out another way of being clever, and I used Alex the parrot as examples, yeah? I think I'll leave it there because I waffled on, but I will put a link in the show notes of where you can buy the book, and I fully recommended it because I think she's an incredible woman who sort of combines science with pushing the paradigms of what science is capable of. And she does actually talk about when she changed from doing animal research into doing plant research. She was shunned by other scientists because she was sort of really stepping outside the comfort zone of what science should be, and she was slightly shunned. But I think she's a great woman, and yes, she helps us look into
the deepest secrets of our souls. My mind unravels like a toilet roll. In the deepest secrets of our souls. And won't somebody please think of the flowers talking to me saying, we are your friends.
Right, so I'm going to leave it there today. So thank you for Len again for coming on, and thank you for the children climate protesters, because they are an inspiration. And thank you for listening, and I will see you again in a couple of weeks. I hope you enjoyed the show. I've sort of been a bit more laid back and chatty today. I hope you don't mind. I've not tried to be funny because it doesn't work, does it? Anyway, bye.
Frog Beat Blog.